Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with Mindrolling, and I have a wonderful new guest. His name is John Tsilimparis, and the subject is the magic in the tragic. That's very catchy. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks for having me, Raghu.
We always do this little bit because I meet people. I just found out I've done 600 podcasts in the last number of years. I'm like, really? The producer let me know this. So each one, I'm meeting people I've never met before. And I always like to say, okay, what was it that propelled you into realizing there was something more than what we were being fed by the culture, from our earliest years, and how there was a light at the end of the tunnel? Where was your light from that time? Yeah, a little bit about where you grew up and all that.
Sure. You mean, I'm assuming you're asking me about the book and what inspired me to write the book?
No, I'm asking you about you actually looking at even teenagers. When I did, I was a very depressed individual, mostly around, this cannot be reality. There must be something else. I'm not buying into this. But I didn't know, I had nowhere to go. And one of the things we'll talk about, because I know it's important to you as well, art and music, in relation to so much of our day-to-day lives and the way that we get caught into very dark places. And that helped me at that time. That was the first thing that helped me. And I won't repeat them, but I had an amazing experience. One of them was with John Coltrane when I was like 17 years old in a club in Montreal where I'm from. He played my favorite things, and that was very profound moment where I felt myself leaving time and space and just being completely absorbed in a way that was unusual for me. So that's what I mean, more about, you and how you came into some kind of idea, some light. Unless maybe you had a fantastic family and you were connected right off the bat, you didn't get into the identity, I got a name, I'm separate. But most everybody does go through that.
My father was very into classical music, and at a young age, he exposed me to the composers that he loved. And I think that that's when a lot of that light for me, or that inspiration, was awakened. I was born lacking the gift of temperance, so I was an anxious, edgy young man and child. And I found that music inspired me. Sometimes it soothed me, but it gave me motivation. And I didn't realize that until later that it gave me a lot of hope, because it was the kind of thing that never let me down. Any kind of music that I listened to, whether it was classical music or the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or a show tune. I mean, I don't love every genre of music, but most of them I can find something in it that I love. So so it happened early with me, and it was through the arts. There are other art forms too, but music is probably my number one art form.
And then leading to, shall we say, a perspective that allowed you to see that we are not our thoughts, we are not our stories, etc.
Yeah. Then there was tragedy early in my family. One of my siblings died at a young age, and so we were living in Europe, and we moved back to the United States. And I went into high school, and I was, oblivious to the idea that I needed to talk about my grief, and my immigrant parents were not privy to that either. And so, I went to high school, and I started using all kinds of mood-altering substances. And it wasn't until my 20s that I started to get in touch with all of that grief and pain. And that was another awakening right there, too. So I got even closer to my musical and aesthetic inspirations, but I started to notice other things, too. Nature, connection with people, other art forms, of course. And then I discovered that, my therapist who was helping me in New York was brilliant. And I figured out that I wanted to do this for a living, and I wanted to help others who had gone through what I had gone through. Because at that time, I had severe panic attacks, I had depression, and all kinds of other stuff going on. And it was hard for me to get it together. But eventually I did. It took me a while. I'm a late bloomer.
Yeah. Well, so this book that you wrote, obviously dealing with darkness and trauma and tragic circumstances. But I mean, if we just take it down to this, I don't think people need to have the most traumatic story. They look around, well, I don't have that kind of trauma. And I think that even the smallest kind of situation, in my own life, it was a despotic father who had bad PTSD from World War II. He was a bomber pilot. And that was really traumatic for me. I know what I'm dealing with still to this day, with all of that and all the spiritual, quote unquote, work that I've done over the decades. So, and I don't think anyone gets away free.
No.
Right?
No, and the book talks about not just grief of losing a loved one, but it's talking about adversity, heartache. It's talking about, unease and, the fallout of breakups and divorces and financial hardships, faded dreams, sort of the myriad of things that we all deal with each day. It doesn't have to be a big trauma in your life. It could be, as they say, death by 1,000 cuts, many, many small little traumas that have affected us so much and have altered our central nervous system. And of course, even today, with all the chaos and all the uncertainty that we're living with, not only in the world, but in this country, anxiety levels are sky high. So my book is about helping people deal with adversity of all kinds, adversity of thought, adversity of your livelihood being at stake. And it's really about finding and nurturing your aesthetic mindset. It sounds like you have an aesthetic mindset. And what that is it's the ability to see depth and emotional value and beauty and meaning in everyday things and trying to see it every day. So if I can do that throughout my day, I can build emotional resilience because I'm converting. This is my definition of emotional resilience, is converting heartache, adversity, trauma, grief, and converting it into thriving. Can I thrive from it? Your grief's never going to go away about how your father traumatized you. It's always going to be there. Hopefully it gets better over the years, but it doesn't go away. So it's our job to find a way to convert it and to transform it into grief empowerment instead of grief avoidance.
By the way, everybody, John is a psychotherapist amongst other podcast host too. Are you still doing podcasts, John?
I haven't done one in a while, but I started it during the pandemic, and when I got involved in the book, I kind of dropped off it a little while, but I will return from it soon. It's called Mindfulness for the Soul. It has about 25 episodes on it, but I would like to get back to it.
Right. So I always joke a little bit about how many psychotherapists I have had on this podcast. And my most famous story is Gabor Mate. And we just started talking about stuff. And then he suddenly just went, yeah, well, what did you do to assuage the trauma as a young child? And so he kind of just turned it all back on me, and I felt I was in a psychotherapy session in the moment. And I remembered this craziness, which isn't crazy. One of the ways that I did assuage that trauma was a love of football. Football? And I'm in Canada too. This is different. I mean, it's pretty much the same, but it's got some different rules. Anyhow, neither here nor there. I was into it myself. I played in camp, all that stuff, touch football, and so on. And he went through a whole process about how I think we were talking more about addiction and how addiction isn't heroin and just heroin or alcohol or whatever. Addiction is what was happening to me. It was what I used to get out of that very painful moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you? Yeah. Is that sounds pretty real? No, I mean, something that you work with.
Again, the aesthetic mindset can be almost anything. It doesn't have to be something beautiful. Hence the word aesthetic. It's something that moves your spirit, lifts your soul, gives you purpose, gives you meaning. You loved football. I love football too. That's one of my sports and music and art. They're my aesthetics. So. It's an interesting question to ask because everyone's done their own part in that. Hopefully, people do things like that, then turn to drugs and alcohol or other types of self-destructive behavior. But in my book, what I do is I have people do, and there's protocols for it. It's called inspiration exposure. And it's where in your darkest moments, instead of running from your grief, you immerse yourself in the awe-inspiring realms of art, music, poetry, philosophy, sports, whatever it is that is your aesthetic. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're discovering that you find meaning in this grief when you pair those two together. And you create, this concept of pain, transferring pain into purpose and finding beauty in your suffering. And this awareness becomes a portal of inspiration where your negative thoughts, your trauma, slowly, this is really important, starts to get reassociated with curiosity, personal growth, and wonderment. Why not wonder about your grief as opposed to wanting to run away from it? And in this country, unfortunately, grief, sadness, all that stuff, those are dirty words. We don't like to talk about that stuff here. The saying is true. Laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. It's a real truth here in the United States. And, I would love to change that. So instead of it being something to be repelled by, why can't it be something that you're drawn to? You might find some solace in it. You might find some beauty in it. So I tell people, respect your pain, dignify it. And in the dignifying it, you're probably going to reduce it as well. Hold it in high regard. And again, the best way to do that is through inspiration exposure. You did that playing football. You inspired yourself.
I'm belittling that in my mind right now, football. How about we move to, in my own case, Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan saved me because it was all about, and this is something else that is reflected in your writing, it's all about connection. And I got connected by him into a greater community, realizing I am not the only one.
That's right.
No, that's a huge thing, is it not?
It's huge. That's a big part of, and there's a chapter in the book about connection and the myth of closure and how important it is for us to have, obviously, gratitude, purpose in our lives. But connection is, and of course awareness, but connection is huge. Human beings are wired. They're not wired for protection until something happens to us. We are much more wired for connection. And it's important. So music is, one of the universal connectors. And Bob Dylan was a big part for me too. Most classic rock was a big part of my childhood.
Yeah. So I think many of you listening or watching really know who Viktor Frankl is. And if not, he was a Holocaust survivor. And you refer to his coining of this term, tragic optimism, which is interesting. The ability to sustain hopefulness despite the trials and tribulations of being human. And yeah, can you talk about that and a little bit about, you say, when I say to people, yeah, Viktor Frankl said this, that, and the other, and there are people who have no idea who that is. But to say he was a Holocaust survivor is one very general thing. But the kind of courage, combination of courage and deep, deep knowing, his connection to spirit, or whatever we can use all kinds of different words, was extraordinary and gave him such authority to express some of the things. Yeah, talk about him.
Yeah,
and what
so he was not
to.
only a Holocaust survivor, which is where he drew a lot of his experience from, but he was also a psychologist. He's a writer. He's a philosopher. And tragic optimism is many things. But yes, it's, again, the ability to convert pain, to transform pain into a kind of thriving. In the book, I talk about constructive aching. In other words, looking back at the grief that I have gone through or the current unease that I have right now and using that as constructive aching, seeing myself as being positively wounded instead of broken down. And I think that's what he used to keep himself alive. He knew that his pride, his sense of well-being couldn't be shattered by the decrepit conditions that he was in. And somehow he managed to deep into his higher self in that way, his prefrontal cortex. And it kept him afloat. Now, that doesn't make him better than anybody else. It doesn't make him smarter than anybody else. It just happened to be that, he was able to muster that kind of insight. And in doing that, he has, changed a lot of lives for people. But that's really what my book is about, not so much tragic optimism, but tapping into that certain higher self. In other words, imagine, Raghu, if you could live your life with as much confidence and with as much faith in the sorrowful or the difficult times in your life as you do with the happy times of your life. It would be vastly different. So he was able to look at the balance in what it is about, pulling joy from elation and maybe even pulling joy from suffering. And, that's his legacy. So we all benefit from that legacy. But, if you can rewire yourself to be inspired by your grief and moved by your grief instead of being avoidant of your grief, you'll have these types of insights. You don't have to be a Viktor Frankl, but you'll get through your life a little bit better.
Well, I have to say, again, going back to this, the kind of courage that he had, that's an extraordinary trait. I mean, we can talk about it, but the way that he lived it was really something else. I tell this story a lot. I'm not even sure. Of course, Ram Dass you're familiar with.
Yes.
So I followed him back to India and met Neem Karoli Baba, his guru, our guru. And a good friend of mine one day went to see Maharaji, is who we called him, Neem Karoli Baba. And supposedly our tradition is bhakti yoga, traditional way of moving on the spiritual path through the agency of duality, of honoring and respecting and becoming one with that which is part of God. So Krishnadas was there, and there was a translator, and there was Maharaji. And suddenly Maharaji looked at Krishnadas and said, through a translator, courage is a very important thing. So the translator, he translated, and then he said, well, wait a minute, Baba. I mean, the truth is, it's Guru's grace. You know, he was saying there is no need, there's no choice, there is no action. This is all just the grace of the Guru. And Maharaji turned back to Krishnadas and said, courage is a very important thing. So, from the time that he told me that story to this moment, I mean, he said, I have had that with me all my life when going through traumatic circumstances of just remembering to connect to that place, which is in all of us, where we are willing to engage with basically very uncomfortable feelings or situations.
That's right. That's right. Pema Chodron, the very well-known American Buddhist, she said that it's kind of like training to be a warrior, of course, the peaceful kind, which is where you can hold your center and you can accept the unacceptable, and little by little you start to habituate to the unacceptable. Now, that doesn't mean giving in and letting other people treat you poorly and accepting situations that are dangerous to you. She just means with how you feel inside. And, you know, human minds are designed to prioritize negativity because that's how we feel safe.
Yeah,
but
that's an important point. I wouldn't run over that. Yeah. That really is a stopper for so many people, a place to get stuck.
Yeah, and so avoiding pain is a natural reflex. You know, we all do it. Nobody likes to suffer. But there's also no escaping it either. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how successful you are, what you've done in this world, how many people love you, how many people you love. You're going to experience some kind of grief, some kind of challenges in your life. And, you know, if I can see that as part of life and see that I do prioritize negativity because that's the way I survive, again, I can dignify it. I can give it a different response. And, call it courage, call it determination, call it intuition. But after a while, it doesn't have to be courage. It's more of a choice. That I'm making this choice because I know that thinking about this and feeling the feelings in the long run is going to make me feel better, which it does. And so it's a choice to make. Can I shorten the time between the time that I'm triggered and that I feel better so that, you know, that window is not so painful? It's not hours, maybe it's minutes. It's not days, maybe it's an afternoon. So that's really what we look for. We look for closing the gap a little bit, so that we can manage our grief a little bit better.
I mean, my own posit on this is whatever that is, in a combination of courage, determination, whatever that place is, which is very necessary for us to be able to move through our lives.
Absolutely. Emily Dickinson, American poet, Emily Dickinson said, people need hard times and oppression to develop psychic muscles. And on that same note, because I quote a lot of people in the book, Marcel Proust, the philosopher, wrote, happiness is beneficial for the body, but it is grief that develops the powers of the mind.
Okay, so here's a Ramdas aphorism.
Hit me.
Suffering brings me closer to God. I would not ask for it, but when it is there, I realize that that is a truth. And that's saying the same thing as you just said. Basically.
Right, whatever your interpretation of God is, too.
Well, God, no, I don't even like the word God particularly, but everybody, you know, we can relate to what the Buddha mind, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all the same.
Yes, suffering, what does it do to other people on a more simple level? It brings us closer to others. It helps us build empathy. It increases the sensitivity of the heart. It heals wounds. It opens up our minds to art. So this alchemy of adversity, this triumph, this, you know, triumph over trauma kind of thing, can only come from that suffering. So is it godlike? Does it have a divine quality? Maybe beauty is the way that the divine shows up for us. So I'll take it. I find the beauty in my suffering.
So something you're talking about emotional resilience here, and I'm sure that you're familiar with the emotional intelligence book by a good friend of ours from the past, Danny Goleman, who was with us in India. How would you relate that in particular, which I go back to a lot in terms of referring to it in terms of podcasts and so on, and giving people a chance to realize just how crucial that is in our day-to-day lives. And it seems to me that emotional resilience is also part of it. And what I was speaking to before was to me, I was going to say, there has to be practice. None of this stuff is going to, even practice, getting meditation, getting used to, all of it, whatever you may do. There's so many different wonderful opportunities, and whatever your proclivity may be. But nothing's going to happen. I mean, I don't like to be so didactic, really, but it's very difficult unless that happens to open up the spaces. And, because you're talking about, where people, there's no gap. This great Tibetan Lama that we knew, and I'm sure you know about him too, Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I mean, he talked a lot about the gap and expanding that, so we're not jumping in on every little reaction to every little phenomena that comes our way.
Yeah. So the book has exercises that put that into practice, what you're talking about now. Remember, having emotional intelligence is very similar to emotional resilience, but one of the differences is having emotional intelligence is having awareness and understanding yourself better, being able to look outside yourself and look in. But the resilience comes from really converting that into energy and purpose and thriving. So putting it into practice is more the resilience part, not necessarily the intelligence part. One of the exercises in the book that I love is I have people write themselves, especially people that have gone through dark days and dealing with grief, not just losing somebody, but, grief after the pandemic, having lost a relationship, what we discussed before, just any kind of adversity. I have them write themselves a sympathy letter or a condolence letter. It could be half a page, it could be a full page, but nothing more than that. And in this letter, they give themselves, as they would be giving to somebody that they love, all of the support, the compassion, the positive regard that they would give someone else about that pain and what that pain caused them, without giving them solutions, without giving them fixes. And it's a really, really life-changing exercise for them, because they finally give themselves this permission to grieve. It gives them the permission to start looking at their grief as something to behold, to hold high in high esteem, as opposed to something that they had to be ashamed of and put away or not discuss with anybody because they were afraid they'd be a burden to them. Yeah. So that's putting it into practice right there. And then I have them look at it every day. And sometimes I'd have them read it back to me in the session and talk about each sentence. And usually it makes them very emotional. Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, because it is putting it into practice.
Yeah. And of course, we have to have a little bit of a purview of how we take over. The mind tends to take over as much as it can. And we talk about, you say we have the power to convert trauma, grief, hardship, and any adversity into thriving. I just, when I read this, it just occurred to me. Remember, I referred a little bit ago to our particular legacy being bhakti yoga, yoga of devotion, right? It also is very much combined with Buddhist wisdom. And it's a great, we do retreats where this combination is very, I've been doing them with Ram Dass while he was alive till 5 years ago. And we continue to do them, have people like Jack Kornfield and Christian, mixing it up where you get there's many different ways up that mountain. But in this particular case, just the combination of the two is very important. So the story is we had one mentor back then. His name was K.C. Tiwari. There's a great film, a little ad here for Brilliant Disguise, which you can find on Amazon Prime, etc. And he was the head of a private school in the foothills of the Himalayas. A regular guy, suit and tie, the whole thing. But in reality, he was a very high yogi. He would go into the deepest states of samadhi, of absorption, that we ever saw in anybody. I mean, just absolutely no pulse, no breathing, the whole classic thing. And he was a teacher to us. I can't tell you how many times he would come up to me. He was much older, and he'd say, "My boy, if you think you're doing it, you are lost." And I always mention this and keep it in the conversation, the way in which we take over our egos, our minds, our story, whatever it is, just wants to have control over outcome. So, yeah.
That's another way that suffering helps us, to use your words, get closer to God or to be close to the divine or the Almighty.
Divine is a good word, yeah.
Because suffering can sometimes shift us from this egocentric way of being to more of a interrelated centric way of being. We are closer to others, which is kind of our purpose, is to connect with others and to be one, to be, of the same, sufferable souls, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I kind of like that. It's a good story. What I always refer to as well is there's a lot of classical references in the book. And one of them is to the ancient Greeks, not because I'm Greek, but because I like the reference. But the ancient Greeks believed in the nobility of suffering. They believed in the kind of nobility that took pride in having suffered. In other words,
really?
Yes, this was the way. This was the way to maturation. This was a way to get vetted by society and by your fellow friend and mind and man. And so, what that is that means that what you grieved for, what you lost, had meaning. It had purpose. And so, I'm taking pride in the fact that I got attached to something that was important to me, and even though it might not be around anymore, that means that I learned that I can find that again. So the pride is in the wound because I have now learned how to live better. And these Greeks were thinking of this 3,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So it's interesting to learn from them. Marcus Aurelius was another great mind to learn from. He was about 1,000 years later, but still brilliant stuff, very cognitive, behavioral, lots of emotional intelligence, and all of them having a great dedication and respect for suffering, hence the magic and the tragic.
How long did it take you to get that title, John?
It came to me one day many years ago, and I remember when my agent and I were shopping it around, many of the publishers that were turning it down were saying, "We don't like the title. We think that's trivializing grief. It's trivializing people's tragedies." And we thought, okay, well, thank you very much. We don't think so, but we're just going to move on. And it doubted me. It made me doubt it for a minute, but I knew that the title was going to work because I think everyone wants to find a little magic in their lives. And why not infuse it in your tragedy, which, as I said before, is completely unavoidable. Maybe one day people won't die and there'll be less tragedy in the world hundreds of years from now when they reverse the aging process. Who knows?
No, that would be a bore, John.
I know. But until then, that's going to happen. And so not just dying, but just adversity.
Yeah.
So why not find a way to hold it in high regard? Be like the ancient Greeks, take pride in it.
Yeah. The other thing you talk about, go back to community. The arts also provide the glue. I mean, we have a lot in common, seemingly, in terms of how much the arts meant to us, and sports and whatever. So you say the arts also provide the glue that bonds us all together in a shared community of sufferable brotherhood. I never heard that before. When we see each other on screen, hear a lyric, learn that the ancients asked the same questions, which you were just referring to, or experience any number of examples from history and art. We feel seen and understood. I understand this, and we go back to, how much music meant to me. I'm 15, 14, 15, 16, 17. I don't know what I would have done without having that. Finally, some connection to something,
Yes. Raghu, there are studies out now that do awe inducement and exposing yourself to inspiration studies. And they find that when you do that, whether it's sports or music or philosophy or history or whatever it is that is your aesthetic, when you flood the mind with that and stay on a steady diet with that, it does so many good things to your brain. But one of the things that it does is it activates what we discussed before, the prefrontal cortex. It activates that executive brain. So once that's activated, you manage and deal with grief and difficult times better. You are more self-reflective. You are more compassionate with others. And so evolutionarily, if you're in that heightened euphoric state, you're probably going to live longer. So I think that that's what, the natural selection looks for. We naturally look for these ways to feel good. But sometimes we have to create the intention to do that because grief or difficult times or tragedy makes us forget. And we have to create the intention to do it. There's a book that came out last year called Your Brain on Art. It's Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. And they are the ones that have done this research. And it's fascinating. They call it nanoaesthetics. And it's all about studying why listening to Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin gives you so much euphoria in the same way that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony does that, or a passage in your favorite book, or the beauty of a sunset, or seeing a clip from your favorite movie. If that gives you that euphoric inspiration, you are activating your prefrontal cortex and you are extending your life. That's why we're drawn to it.
Amazing.
And connecting to the divine, if you're into that too.
Well, ultimately, I don't think there's any separation whatsoever from merging with a piece of art or a piece of music. That is the divine. Right in there.
I agree with you.
When we talk about practices, we were speaking to it before. Practices are necessary to create an environment that you can flourish in, especially regarding transforming traumatic events, especially around attachment to depression and so on. And mindfulness, absolutely number one on the hit parade, so to speak. And you say mindfulness helps people develop a different relationship with discomfort, which we've been speaking to. It's the most important thing, and teach self-regulation and relaxation techniques. But creating a different relationship with discomfort is paramount, right?
It is. Again, we are so sensitized to move away and push away our discomfort, any kind of discomfort. So that's why mindfulness got an entire chapter in my book, because there's so much to say about it. And that's really what it's about. It's not avoidance. Mindfulness is not meditation. It's not, joining a religion. It's really all about heightening your awareness to how you're feeling. And there are steps to that. It's sensory perception, it's progressive muscle relaxation, but it's mainly about awareness. Me being able to be much more of an observer, maybe even an author of my thoughts and my near future, instead of being a victim of my thoughts or the past. In other words, I'm shifting from being much more of a watchful person about how I feel. And that step right there, that inflection point of being watchful, helps me to say, well, I'm just observing my grief. I don't have to run from it. I may not like it, but just because I'm having it doesn't mean something's wrong. I'm just being watchful. So that's developing a different relationship with it. And there's a bunch of quotes from a couple of very famous, John Kabat-Zinn is mentioned in there, who's a big mindfulness guy, and a few others. So yeah, it's a big part. And then learning how to deactivate, the very sort of like activated areas in your body that get anxious whenever you are in unease. So those come together very well. And I know you're no stranger to mindfulness.
Well, I think that one of the biggest issues around mindfulness and the practice of it is the perspective from which you are engaging. And one of the greatest offerings from Ram Dass in the latter part of his life, when he was on Maui and where all of this kind of started, the foundation, everything we're doing, podcasts, all of it, was his teaching around loving awareness. And he would tell people, just move into the center of your being, center of your chest, take a few breaths in and out to move out of your mind and out of your story that you're telling yourself, and out of the place from which you judge what you start to become way more aware of, out of that place. And from the place where we are connected, truly connected, then we can practice mindfulness. We are not judging and so on. I thought, to this day, to me, this is one of the most useful practices related to mindfulness.
In chapter 2 of The Magic and the Tragic is called moving from, I forgot what it's called exactly, but it's about reauthoring our wounds. And it's identifying the stories that we have attached to our grievances, again, any grievance, and coming up through the exercises with more compassionate, more loving, more rational responses or rationales for what happened or what didn't happen. So that's very powerful.
Yeah, it's called, you're right, I just looked it up, I have the book. Reauthoring Our Wounds, moving from sadness to inspiration.
From sadness to inspiration.
That's really important too. I mean, it reminds me, I most of my teen years were sadness. I guess obviously a big factor was my father's PTSD and my relationship with him, and mother depressed, all of it. So it was a lot of sadness, and then music helped to start to pull me out of it. But yeah, how we get from sadness to inspiration is probably a very, very important aspect.
That's right. Because we're not saying you need to let go of sadness. We're not saying that you should shun it and sweep it under the carpet. But can you convert it? Can you transform it into inspiration as well? It's kind of like when you look back at something that you've been grievous about, and then you start to have a lot of appreciation for having gone through it or for the time that it was. And sometimes connecting that, as I mentioned, with beautiful things, the aesthetics that you love, is really important. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is try to learn how to give yourself chills every day.
I like that. That's cool.
Allow yourself to feel the totality of being human. Learn to give yourself goosebumps, whatever that may be. And if you can do that every day, your day is going to be vastly different. But again, without the intention to do it, hence the practice again, hence being that peaceful warrior that Pema Chodron talks about. Without the intention, it may not always happen. Happiness and inspiration will not knock on the door. You have got to wake up and do it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same if you, people writing me, I really need to get a partner. It's the most important thing in my life right now. And, you know, we all understand. We all want connection. You got to have intention, even for that. But the greater intention is to be able to live an inspired life. Right?
Yeah. And what are you going to do with your experience? You know, Aldous Huxley said, experience is not just what happens to you. Experience is what you do with what happens to you. What are you going to do with all those experiences that you are really hardened against?
Yeah.
It doesn't bring you a lot of happiness, and it certainly doesn't let you move on as a person and as a growing human being. So that's why The Magic and the Tragic is, in my opinion, a fun book, because you're connecting to things that you love. And along the way, if that can soothe some of the sadness in your life, then it's a win-win situation.
Yeah. Got some great quotes too, John. Gandhi, who we all love. Joy lies in the fight, in the attempt, in the suffering involved, not in the victory itself. That's all for Gita, Bhagavad Gita stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, those are, I referred to many figures, Martin Luther King Jr., Winston Churchill, Gandhi, all people that really went through a lot in their lives, had dark days, a history of suicidal ideation. And out of that darkness, out of those ashes, they changed the world. Now, again, this is not about becoming a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King Jr., not about that at all. But maybe you can be inspired to do your job better. Maybe you can be a better father or a better mother. Maybe you can be kinder to people that you meet in the street. You can be great in other ways. You don't have to be Winston Churchill and win World War II for Europe and preserve democracy. It doesn't have to be that lofty.
You know, there's one thing, John, that I didn't get, and maybe I didn't go through it thoroughly enough. The need for nostalgia. Okay, so let me just tell you my little take. Up until the pandemic, I basically went to India as a retreat year to year for all those years from the early 70s on. And as time went on, I started thinking, is there something here holding on nostalgically to experiences of the past? Now, these experiences were so transformative. I mean, they were extraordinary. You know, being around a being, the miracles going on, and no real teaching, someone just being it, that you could be in that non-duality, that no time, no space, you know, it was just extraordinary. And so I started thinking about it, and I only thought of this when I saw this chapter, The Need for Nostalgia, and I thought back to that time. It was happening, you know, a number of years ago, you know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I remember, is that what's going on here? I have to really look inside myself around this, because that's not useful. To me, what's useful is what is right in now, the nowness, you know, and that presence being here and available now, which it is. And So, yeah, talk about that a little bit.
So, yeah, I mean, the present moment is, of course, all we have, because the future-based thinking, which is usually fear-based, is the play of thought.
Yeah.
And how we interpret the past, especially if we interpret it negatively, is also the play of thought. However, the chapter talks about, and it gives really good examples from good research, that there is value, and they've done studies on this, on the power of daydreaming and nostalgia. So in other words, human beings are, prediction-making machines. We always have to predict things so that we stay safer. If you think of, the cave-dwelling ancestors we have, prediction meant surviving a winter. Prediction meant I need to stock food in the cave, et cetera, et cetera. Prediction meant I protect my family from other, rival tribes. So sometimes remembering and being nostalgic about how we used to be happy and the things that we used to do that made us happy can help us live better in the present. And it doesn't have to be the nostalgia of sad things. Of course, it can be that. But there's also nostalgia of things that we can still replicate today. So that kind of reflection can be a wallowing in something that you can't change anymore, but it can also be positive. And there's a good exercise at the end that helps people to do that. The same thing with daydreaming. Daydreaming in this country, the way suffering gets a bad rap, also gets a bad rap, because if you're daydreaming, you're wasting time. You're being very quixotic. You're thinking about things that are never going to happen. Well, maybe daydreaming is, your intuition. Maybe daydreaming is, your ability to think outside the box. It's good to daydream. And sometimes daydreaming is good because it's a good escape. Most of the time, our minds are so addled with stress and worry that sometimes a 5-minute or even a 5-second daydream is helpful. It gives the brain some respite. So there are positives to that.
I guess I was, in my own case, referring to holding on to a past rather than living in the present. But I get, the potential. I mean, the reality is the inspiration that came, and for me in those days, didn't go anywhere, and that's probably where I might have told my younger self to focus a little bit more.
That would be less, in my opinion, what you just described, that would be less being nostalgic, and that would still be grieving about your past. Because once it shifts, you'll see it more as nostalgia, and it'll have a different energy to it.
Mm-hmm. See, I knew I needed another psychotherapist session. Thank you, John.
Right. You've had many, I guess, as I have.
Here's a great. Self-love is learning how to listen to your own heart so you can understand someone else's. I've never heard of this person, Zealous Sage, but I love the quote, and it's very much what I think is the antidote to the complete obsession that we have, all of us, at one point or another, or ongoing, to our me.
Yeah, that's where self-forgiveness comes in, cutting yourself some slack, which many people have a hard time doing.
Yeah.
But it's true. If I can love myself, again, if I can find magic in my tragic and look back at all the things that I've been through in an honorable way, I might be kinder to myself instead of calling myself an idiot for not having thought this or not having done that. So that's another way to deal with suffering in a positive way, which is to, convert that into self-compassion instead of blame. Now, it's good to learn about things from the past that we need to know about the future so we don't repeat them. But I need to do that in a loving and kind way. I didn't know at the time. I did my best. Even ostensibly good people make bad mistakes. So, yeah, I like that quote a lot. And it's been a journey for me to do that for myself. It's not something that comes easy to me.
Or anyone.
I'm still as Brene Brown says, I'm still a recovering perfectionist. And so I'm very hard on myself about lots of things.
Yeah. Well, we're at the end, but I wanted to, I found this quote from Ram Dass, which I think is useful as part of this conversation. Here it is. And you use your unique entrapment as the vehicle for getting free of entrapment. So as the Gita says, to do someone else's dharma is not going to work. You have to do your own. See, the real appreciation and the fun of it is to realize that just where you are with every one of your neuroses and your fears and all your shtick, you are in exactly the right place at this moment from your evolutionary point of view. There are no errors in the game. There's not even a possibility of one. Isn't that great?
I like that. I quote Khalil Gibran as well from the Prophet, and he talks about that entrapment. He doesn't use that word, of course, being the shell, the breaking of the shell that was you, or that you thought was you. That breaking of the shell opens you up to find that more authentic you. But you have to know that there was an entrapment.
Yeah.
So I like that quote very much.
Yeah.
That was Ram Dass, you said?
Yep, that was Ram Dass. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, John.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure getting to know you and hanging out in this space. The Magic and the Tragic, which I love that title. That title spoke to me. I don't know how I got the book or maybe one of your people or publicists or something. But the reality is this has got some really substantial information and material and connectivity too. John Tsilimparis, The Magic and the Tsilimparis.
Yeah. But okay. Tsilimparis is okay too. Yeah, it's available, on Amazon, all bookstores.
Yeah. Well, we're going to put a link up. We're going to put a link up. Yeah, in the show notes. Everybody, you'll be able to hook up. And I don't know, are you still treating people?
Yeah, I still have a full practice.
Oh, you do?
I find time to write in between. I'm already writing another book that maybe will be out next year. Yeah, I still practice. I mean, I've been at it for a long time, so I'm kind of slowing down a little bit, but I still enjoy helping people.
Oh, that's great. Well, anyhow, all of John, you'll send to me whatever it is, and we can put it in the show notes to connect with you, or even a Marcus Aurelius book. That might be cool too. I don't know why I just thought of that. Yeah, whatever you'd want for people to be able to connect with, that would be great. And so this is Mindrolling, Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/Mindrolling, and you'll get all of the show notes. And at the same time, you can check out Be Here Now Network with podcasts from all sorts of absolutely wonderful people, including the likes of Krishnamurti, Alan Watts, Ram Dass, Jack Kornfield, all kinds of incredible people. So I leave you to that. And again, thanks so much, John. Namaste.
Thank you.